Black GI? Is it fair to serve more than the white Americans that sent you here? Nothing is more confused than to be ordered into a war to die without the faintest idea of what's going on. I dedicate this next record to the soul brothers of the 1st Infantry Divisions. Be safe.
Benjamin, welcome back to Vietnam.
Look what I found.
You're the man in all his glory.
Who was that guy?
That brother was the best damn soldier that ever lived. We bury it. Later on, we come back and collect.
Coming to you now from scattered makeshift office areas and residential-style quarantine boxes, it's The Film Board from The Next Reel on rashpixel.fm. We spoil movies, and this month, the definitions of new original content and new film release is beginning to merge for us, and it'll be interesting to see where the industry moves as theaters generally remain closed and opening criteria remain somewhat unclear. Spike Lee's new movie, Da 5 Bloods, was released on Netflix this past Friday, June 12th, and is available to all subscribers right now. We may have called this new original content in the past, but regardless of what you call it, this new film release makes sense for us to gather together and talk through. At the next reel, when the movie ends, our conversation begins, and there's so much to talk about with this one. Let your voice be heard by connecting with us on Discord. We have a server there where film fans like you from all over the globe discuss details about all our shows and the entertainment industry as a whole. We're always working for a better and more interactive experience, so come and enlist with our army of cinephiles. Check out all the details at thenextreel.com. I usually try to avoid war metaphors when I'm writing the stuff, but I feel like with Da 5 Bloods, it may be appropriate. So let's dig in to the time frame as I introduce our hosts with an odd question, but one that's potentially appropriate for this kind of trip. Gentlemen, have you learned more about the Vietnam War from movies or some other source? Tell me about it for you, Tommy Handsome.
An interesting question. You can tell by my voice. That's my interesting question voice. Definitely movies were my intro into it. By the time I saw Platoon and stuff, it was really starting to crystallize as the incredible experience, the ridiculous experience that it was. And then there was also a book that my father recommended called Hue 1968 by Mark Bowden, who also wrote Black Hawk Down, which is this big. You can't see, but it's enormous. It's exhaustive. It's about the Tet Offensive, and it's incredible. And finally, just before he died, my late grandfather, who flew bombers in World War II, Vietnam, and Korea.
And all three wars?
Correct. Yes. He was awarded 2 different distinguished flying crosses. He was in the Air Force. Yeah. So, but he didn't really talk about it very much. Yeah. Until very near to his passing. So yeah. So that's where I get it from. Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I kind of want to get into that. How about you, Pete, right? Is it movies or other?
Well, I would like to first say that Mark Bowden is I'm really glad you mentioned Mark Bowden because he is a prior guest on this show. I interviewed him a number of years ago when we did our series on the works of on Black Hawk Down, and he's a fantastic person, and we should put the link to that in the show notes because he was a delightful interview. My dad was in all the wars and is now the director of the Interplanetary Space Force, so he knows a lot about war too. So he's probably better than Tommy's family in some way. But
seems rude.
No, my dad was he was in the Navy. He's a Navy vet, but he was a Navy journalist, and so his entire job was to talk about the war and to talk about what was going on in real time. And so he was, he's a journalist all my life growing up. And so he was very actively engaged in history. And it was an important part of my experience with him growing up was having conversations. So I would say probably people since then, right, in my adult career. That's weird. In my adult life, it's been movies, but my formative sort of before I was 21, it was Dad. It was kind of reliving history through his experience reporting on it.
Wow, that's awesome. And then let's welcome to the conversation Steve Sarmento. What's your Vietnam story?
So it's like flip flop of Pete, because for me it was all movies. So working in a video store in high school. So, Apocalypse Now, Deer Hunter, Platoon, all of that. And then when I got into college, I had a neighbor that moved into the house, where my family lived. And so I started getting secondhand stories because my dad would go over there on poker nights. So I started to hear stories from him, which were fascinating. I have no idea how many of them were true. He had seen some really rough stuff, but there were some stories there. My uncle served. When he came back, he stayed in California, so I never really got a chance to hear stories from him. My father-in-law was in the Air Cavalry, so he does not talk about it except for the brief period of time when my wife and I lived in Alexandria, Virginia, and my in-laws came out to visit. We toured, all the memorials of the Vietnam Wall, and he, was looking at one of the statues and said, "Oh, yeah, that's like the gun that I would carry," and that's pretty much it. Still doesn't talk about it really at all. So I think it's what's interesting is for our generation, there's a lot of close family that were involved, but the stories just did not come back. And I think that speaks volumes to what things were like over there.
So that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this first. I'm JJ, and I asked that question to you guys because I think Pete, your experience with your dad as a journalist is probably a little bit different. My dad was a Navy veteran too. He did 2 tours in Nam, and he never talked about it. Like he didn't talk about the Navy at all, but then he definitely didn't talk about Vietnam. And I think it's an unfortunate but common story regarding, primary sources about that period in our history, because I think we need these stories. I think it's essential for us to learn about what happened, be right or wrong, and I think we still have stories to learn from Vietnam, and there's immense numbers of great movies. I mean, that everybody's brought up different movies as we're sat here and talk about it. That's great. There's so many great movies and content that are set in that period. And now the reason why I wanted to intro this movie that way is because this movie, it's not a first-hand account, true story sort of thing, but Spike Lee has created an amalgam type of a vehicle to portray the experience of the Black GI with a story like this. And I think that's a really interesting way to bring to this, because I don't know that I've seen this story told this way before. So I think it's yet another thing to kind of put in to the movie landscape to teach us about Vietnam and what happened during that time. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get initial thoughts from you guys about these movies. How was The Five Bloods for you, Steve Sarmento?
Well, this is an interesting question to start with, because as I watched this, I was expecting a Vietnam War movie, because that's, what you got in the trailer. But for me, this isn't really a Vietnam War movie. Mm-hmm. It's really is it even a war movie? Because it's really about struggling with the being haunted by the past. And part of that has to do with being in Vietnam, but there are a lot of other things, because we see from the get-go, it sets the tone for the era that these guys are going to be, I guess, from their past, what the past that is haunting them. We've got all that archival footage. And as I was watching that, it reminded me, particularly the Democratic National Convention, because my dad was going to art school in downtown Chicago at that time. And I remember in high school asking him about that time, and he said it felt like the world was going to end every day. And I think that collage at the beginning really sets that tone with just violence and shooting and everything, and just the tension that was going on. So for me, this was really about the consequences of that and the impact that's had on this group of 4 men. And Vietnam is part of it because they go back there. But it's really, for me, it's another story, I feel like, of the baby boomer generation sort of digging into their past and reevaluating things and looking at that, because we've got 4 different guys that are in very different places in their lives, but they still have something in common. And for me, it's really about that brotherhood. And I guess that's why the film has the title it does. It is about these 5 guys and the relationships there, and how, despite everything that the world will throw at them, there are some bonds that last and endure. And for me, that's what the strength of this story really is. And I really, really enjoyed it. It's not the movie I expected, but it is definitely one that I'm looking forward to watching again.
Cool. I'm glad you liked it. And it is a different take on it. I think I might agree with you that it's not essentially a war movie, but it's definitely the vehicle that we have there in it. Pete, how did it hit you?
Well, very well. We're coming on the heels of exploring Spike Lee in some detail. We did a number of his films on the main show, and I feel like I learned a lot about just experiencing Spike Lee's films, watching them back to back, like we did. And this movie, as a result, I think this movie is a showcase of all of the things that Spike Lee has been doing over the years, writ large, right? I mean, it is the most opinionated Spike Lee film that I have seen. Wow. And I am a fan of opinionated Spike Lee films, right? I'm a big fan of Bamboozled. That was a master class.
That's my favorite of his,
right? I mean, it's extraordinary. This movie, I think where I struggled with this movie was where I feel like his cup runneth over right now as a director, as a creator, as a man, as a human being with things to say.
Sure.
And he put so many of them in this movie that at times I wondered, is this too much? Are we trying to do too much with this movie? It is, but I found it extraordinary. I think his hand is so full and strong as a visual filmmaker. There are things that he does that I would never do on a project that I'm working on, but it's a Spike Lee thing, and I get it, and I get what he's doing. And even when I feel like he's hammering me over the head with a point, I'm generally in it with him. So cool. I can't wait to talk about some of these details. It generally worked for me, but I am aware that much of the reason it works for me is because I am such a Spike Lee fan.
Cool. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Tommy, what was it like for you watching Da 5 Bloods?
It was a really interesting film to watch, both for my opinions of its failures and its successes. I mean, I found it to be very messy. I found it to be overlong, at times overly melodramatic and episodic. But there's such a depth of feeling and rage and sense of history and so much ambition in it that ultimately it's a film that I'm really glad that I had a chance to watch.
Cool. Yeah, I think for me, I'm in a weird place about it. I think I was taken out of the experience of this movie quite a bit by the Netflix release. To be honest, that mixed with Steve, you were talking about the archival footage and the cutaways and the way that the way that they inserted a number of them, it made it feel more like a TV show to me. And I don't think that's a fault of the movie. I think it was difficult for me to have the right movie viewing experience when watching this, because I was laying on my bed watching it, this kind of thing, as opposed to getting into it with it was there. And I think some of the things you were talking about melodrama, Tommy, for example, with the score and whatnot, it didn't match my feeling, but that might have been just because I couldn't get there. So for me, it wasn't that. But at the same time, I had a really emotional time with this movie. When I was in it in a very thick way. And I want to get to talking about that too. So before we get started with it, I think that there's just so much to talk about this movie, similar to what you were talking about, Pete, of like, there's going to be a lot of points to get to here. I'm going to do a quick synopsis of what the movie is. And I don't think there's too much of a spoiler in here, but just to get us all on the same page of where we're at, let's talk about what the movie is. It's about, we've all talked about, 4 Black Vietnam veterans returning to fulfill a promise to a brother who fell in battle. In an effort to recover his remains and unearth a secret treasure of gold that they discovered while fighting in the war. They're presented with difficult challenges related to their bonds together, some perspective shifting surprises regarding what they left in country, and the maddening lust of unthinkable wealth. The characters change actually in differing ways as they are forced to confront their wartime sins, as well as the prospect of new temptation. Everyone feels like they have a claim to the fortune, from the main characters to the others brought into their orbit and the local Vietnamese people too. While the war is over, all these sides continue to fight for freedom and respect. So that doesn't get into any of the points specifically, but from a very high level thing, we're talking about what happens in this movie. And it's not a war movie, but there's a lot of fighting. There's a lot of gunplay. There's a lot of tactical stuff actually going on in it. But the big story, it kind of centers on this gold, right? That they found while they were fighting as brothers together in the war. And I feel like there's so many different takes on what it could be as a metaphor. Is gold, is this, I mean, I mentioned they're fighting for freedom and respect. Is gold salvation here? Or is this the feelings that they buried along with what they were doing in the war? Like, what was it when you watched? What did the gold mean to you?
Such a great question, because for me, it was very much a metaphor for their experience of friendship, because it unites them in leaving Vietnam and having something to come back for together. But it is also ultimately their undoing, right? Their friendships, their bond is not that strong, right? As their friend character, as he says, this is gold. Norman was right, and then steps on a mine and blows up. That's also a metaphor, right?
Yeah.
That was a horrific sequence that described exactly what they were going for, that the gold was the MacGuffin, right? And that they should not have been paying such attention to this search for gold, because in doing so, they lost their way with their friendship.
That's a great point, to think of it as not necessarily not a story metaphor, but a MacGuffin to really challenge them with what they had and what they need.
Yeah, because all of them had to come back to Vietnam for some reason, right? They all, as part of the story, they all had something to do in Vietnam to make themselves whole again. And they each sort of go through that process, and I think the story of Otis and Tien and meeting his daughter was so interesting. It was just captivating to me. And we get 2 scenes. I wanted more of that.
Yeah.
I found that fascinating. But ultimately, to Paul's experience actually, resolving his relationship with the ghost of Nelson was, I thought,
Norman,
extraordinarily powerful. Norman, extraordinarily powerful. So they each had their reason to do it. It wasn't the gold. The gold was just the surface element that got them there and ultimately drove them apart.
Yeah, I think, and to echo that, I think it's that the gold was a redemption. In a certain way, redemption and a freedom as a way to kind of try to move on, because as we learn when they go back there, they never really left.
Right.
In the same way that Pete is saying of like, they all have different connections to it, especially with the character of Del Relindo's Paul, he has never left.
Right.
Everything has been just, he's still fighting that for so many different reasons. And so I think it's a chance at redemption and a second chance to remake your life in a way that was never offered, as is stated very obviously in the film, by America, by the American government, the promise that was never delivered.
Well, and then you think about everyone divvying up their shares. Like if you go with your line of talking here, right? Like if everyone's divvying up their shares of redemption, is it even really redeeming? Right? I mean, like who gets a full share and who gets it? It's like, that's where it becomes the MacGuffin of like, it's not worth it. And I mean, that scene that Pete brought up with the landmine is just like, just hammers at home to that whole piece there. But
to your point, JJ, it all comes back to the math, which over the course of the film, the share math becomes nonsense. Right? I mean, it is it's theater of the absurd in their relationship. And I think that makes it really powerful.
Steve, what was your take on it?
Yeah, I'm going to side with Pete. I think it's the MacGuffin, but I mean, I think you have to come back to what Norman, hit what he sets the tone with of it's power. It's going to get them what's been due to them. That's the whole reason to take this back. It's what is owed to their people, and they need to bring that back. And what happens, when, now it's about my own personal benefit, and that's they came back and it was even worse for them. They left huge chunks of themselves there, but their lives are not, they may put on the facade because we've got, the, car dealer who's got nothing, his name is on the dealerships, but he's made bad choices. He's got no money. So he needs this to make himself whole. And I think that's what's happened here is they get greedy and it's about making themselves whole versus what Norman set up for them, which is we're doing this for everybody back home. that's fighting the same fight, and this is what everyone is due. And I think so for me it is that MacGuffin, but it ties into sort of the redemption piece, because money is power, money is status, and if we can get this back and we can give it to everybody, then we can start making a difference.
Right. And it's interesting that the battle that they had with fighting the urge to support the community and fight and the urge to support their individual redemption. I think that's one of the really beautiful things about this story as it goes through. One of the things that you said, Tommy, I think is really interesting here too, when we think about that they never stop fighting, right? The war never ends. We actually have that comment from their guide, Vin, at one point when they're in the temple ruins late in the movie. And he says, wars never really end. And he looked to me, he doesn't really look like he's of the age, right, that would have participated in the war. He looks like he's younger, but he's making the point that even though the war is officially over, it's still being fought, which I think was interesting too when you start looking at how Spike Lee chose to tell this story. There's this one kind of big filmmaking decision, right, that there's so many things that are told to us in flashback here. And with our Norman, played by Chadwick Boseman, who died there, he is essentially always that form in flashback, and yet the other 4 actors are all not de-aged, right? The actors that we see in present time are the same, they look the same age when they're fighting in Nam. I think from a story aspect, what you were talking about, Tommy, that connects for me there. I didn't get it when I saw it in the movie. I was confused at why Delroy Lindo in particular is like an old guy in Vietnam, and he's an old guy in the future. But it makes sense for the storytelling here.
The first time that we were in the first real flashback, when we're in the helicopter and you see Chadwick Boseman with all of them, I went, oh no,
right?
Like this isn't going to work. Like, oh no, is this Netflix money or what's happening? What a weird choice. But when you think about the past, I think a lot of times you put yourself in your current age back then. The fact that they never left, the fact that it is Chadwick Boseman, who is really like a Christ-like figure by the end of it, preaching to these older men, it worked for me. It really ended up, at some point I stopped caring about that at all, and it really seemed like a smart decision, not a financial decision, which I liked.
But there's a really interesting thing about that, you guys. Did you catch the one picture
the photo
where they were de-aged?
It's twice. It's twice.
Yeah.
It's once in the beginning, because I went back to watch that whole opening piece again, because there's so much text on the screen.
Right.
Yeah.
With names of people. So I wanted to go back and watch that again after I finished the movie to see what is all the text in here. And I saw the photo again, because it's in the front and at the end, where they do have the younger versions of themselves. Yeah. Sort of the de-aged photo.
And that really works to back up that idea, is that Chadwick Boseman's preaching, which may be a little bit platitudish for me, maybe a little heavy-handed for me, all of those points still work to these now older men. Nothing has changed enough. So they might as well be those older men back in that situation. I thought it was really smart.
I think it is really smart. And I will tell, I want to reiterate the point that I didn't get it when I saw the movie. I thought I was confused by it for a good amount of time, but like you, Tom, as we went through, I started forgetting about it, but I didn't realize the connection until we started having this conversation right now. So I'm super happy about that. We talk about Paul, that's Delroy Lindo. And I think interesting, I feel that this movie kind of becomes his story. I know that there are other stories to be told here too, but he really becomes the central figure in this movie. And I think it's really interesting to see how his life changes over the course of this movie in what he's trying to accomplish by going back to Vietnam. He was a Trump supporter. He wore a MAGA hat. There's all these pieces, and he does actively descend into madness through all these things, and for a number of different reasons. What did you guys buy it? Did you go with him on this ride? I love Delroy Lindo. I was super happy with the stuff he brought. A lot of the changes with the character, when they felt like they were on a pin or on a dime, I didn't necessarily get pulled with him. I was a little bit behind when he was changing in the love for his son, or the backstabber of his son. That's what he said at one point. it was a little hard for me to go with him, but I think it was an amazing movie for that actor. And I think he delivered a really interesting performance considering that.
I will say that I agree with you that it's his story primarily, and that there are two pieces that I think really worked for me. And and I can't pinpoint the one, but he's talking about basically how it has to do with control and how he feels like he's not in control of his own life. And then there's what I'm going to call his soliloquy as he's off on his own directly to the camera, where we find out that he possibly has cancer.
Yep. Right.
But basically he's going to die on it. Right. Yeah. He's going to die on his own terms. So we've got what I sort of came to the conclusion of as I piece things together is he's a man who came back, felt like he has no control of his life. He's got this unresolved guilt, and he is determined to assert control in his life. And so for me, that makes sense for him to be the MAGA hat wearing guy of here's somebody that understands that is a control person that's going to exert control and rein things in for somebody who feels like the world is spinning out of control. So it made sense for me. And I was able to assemble that by the time I got to the end of it, because at first I wasn't sure, but there were key moments that I feel like really made it a powerful story for him. And I feel like almost to the detriment of some of the other characters, because it seems like his story just had so much more emotion to it than the others that I just didn't connect with all of them as much. Like I honestly, Melvin, I don't know anything about him,
right.
You know, and Eddie steps on a mind, but we know a little bit about him. But it's really about Paul and Otis, and who have the exact like opposite experiences of, you know, resolution with family, I think.
Well, and if this isn't Delroy Lindo's best actor nod and all four of them, you know, competing for best supporting, I don't know how else this movie gets. Like they were there to get him to Vietnam. They were there to get him into that river at the end of the movie. And I mean, that is so clear when you look at even the sort of sub stories around Otis that just didn't get really fulfilled.
Yeah.
But I was, to answer that question, I mean, I was right in it. It took me a long time to feel like I was getting in it with Delroy Lindo. I struggled in the first hour, but I think it was right around when they got the gold and they're all trudging back up the road. And everything's really heavy. I was so glad that everything was heavy.
Right, appropriately
that their pockets,
heavy.
Like, they couldn't walk. And I thought that was amazing. Like, thank you for making gold heavy in this movie. That was just, it's a weird, stupid bit of attention to detail that I think is lost.
No, but it's like Three Kings when they have to learn the tensile strength of the bags. And Ice Cube knows it because he works at an airport. Yeah, transporting that amount of gold is impossible.
Nightmare.
It's impossible. Yeah. So, and so I thought that was really
Which is
delightful.
a heavy burden to, I mean, you can also...
Right. It keeps playing out.
Yeah.
When they get into the skirmish with the guys who try to take the gold...
are you talking about just coming out of the forest and being approached by the cars? Okay. Yeah.
It was that sequence when I felt like, okay, they're doing a couple of things here that are really interesting. One, these are older men, and they don't portray them as buffoons now because of their age. Right. They are still very much soldiers, right? And I thought that was a really powerful statement back to some things that all of you guys have said about how these guys never left Vietnam, that they were soldiers then, and their nightmare continues and their skills continue. You know, when David gets shot and, you know, the medic skill comes out, right? And he's
tourniquet,
tourniquet, he's tightening him up, and there was never any question that their age led to inexperience. And I thought that was a really a wonderful way to portray these guys. But two, I finally got a point that I finally feel like I got a bead on Delroy Lindo's pain. And from that point on, I was on the character ride with him. So by the time he starts staring directly at the camera, which was deeply disquieting for me, I was with him dramatically. And I thought that is an incredibly interesting and courageous choice, Spike and Delroy. Let's see where this goes.
Yeah.
For me, because I can identify with what you're saying, JJ, about some of the pinballing, you can call it. I mean, the movie has whiplash tonal shifts.
Yeah.
At times, a lot of that is on the back of Melvin, the son Melvin, who is like madcap and crazy, and then is immediately supposed to start crying. I mean, those are problematic for me, but
the son David, as you mean?
Yes. Who's Melvin?
Yeah. Melvin is the guy with the metal detector.
Good to know. Anyways, I couldn't see.
Really, case in point. Yeah. All of that.
Poor Melvin. I mean, you guys already brought up the Melvin story is very small.
But
isn't it great? He only finds the gold. He doesn't carry the gold. He's his own metaphor.
Good point.
What I was going to say, though, is for me that the Delroy before the soliloquy into the camera, the most. Because I did have a lot of trouble with Delroy Lindo's character in a way that I think we're supposed to. That really long uncut shot past the shoulders of two of his friends as Delroy Lindo just finally takes his bag, separates from the group, and just marches into the wilderness.
Yeah.
That can be said. Certain people can say that is a Trump supporter. Certain people can say that is just an African-American person in America. There's so much of just, he is ranting a bit. He's understandably angry, but he's also lashing out. And he has decided, I know what's best. To Steve's effort, I know what's best, and I'm going to get it done by myself because I can't count on anyone else, as he walks away from his only possible salvation into the wilderness.
Yeah.
I mean, into a jungle that has been already so unforgiving. That scene, that shot was the most moving for me in the entire movie.
I love how you said that, Tommy, because that's something for me that I think this movie does really well, as sort of overwrought as it feels if I let it all sit in my brain at once. That scene represents, I think, a choice to let grief be heard by people whose ideological worldviews I do not agree with. But it does not, it doesn't mean that grief isn't real, that heartbreak isn't real, that they don't feel as strongly as I do about name the cause, right? And I think that's one of the things to be celebrated about this movie, that everybody feels and allows you to see their pain in I think an authentic way, a natural way.
Yeah, I love that you guys bring up the emotional aspects of this. The looking into the camera piece was, I think, disquieting is a great word to use for it. It didn't, that particular thing didn't 100% work for me because I was scared. I couldn't connect with the emotions that I was feeling in that moment, right? And I know that it's going to work differently for other people out there. I love, Tommy, that you bring up the walking away alone. The big emotional hits for me in this, where they all put in their hand at the prayer at Norman's grave, and then David tells a prayer, and this shot is from above on the hands, slowly backing away. I'm getting emotional even talking about it. Slowly backing away as David, who wasn't there, is praying over the body of Norman. Like, that was really heavy for me. Eddie's death, we brought it up a couple times, the landmine, as he walks backwards into the landmine and then dies, but then we see his final moments, still
shocking,
still calling out, like, no limbs, right? I mean, and I'm not saying it to be vulgar here. I'm just saying it to sort of channel the emotion.
Yeah.
No limbs, and still calling out his message, right? Saying bloods, like that. Oof, it was huge. And then, of course, the big salvation moment with Norman forgiving Paul for the friendly fire that we learn, right? If there's one major spoiler to tell here, is that Paul's grief is self-inflicted because of friendly fire killing this person that he loves so much. When Chadwick Boseman says to him, after this heartfelt forgiveness, an apology and embrace, he says, "You did get me though." That piece, it was just it delivered perfectly, written perfectly, like, for the characters, for everything they went through. Like, the big emotional hits in this movie were really good. Were really, really good here. Were there any more? I mean, I don't want to not talk about these. Were there any other things that hit you guys really hard in terms of emotion?
Oh, Otis and his daughter at the end, that final callback. And I was kind of mad that she only got that little bit of play.
Yeah.
and especially when you have Tien talking about like, I was a whore and you were a black soldier, and the white soldiers taught us like that our relationship was to be reviled.
Right.
And then I had a child and I had to deal with that. And clearly this woman walks in who is stunning and powerful and strong and confident. So I'm left sort of with that echo through the entire course of the movie. How is that going to play out? How are they going to come back to that? And at the end, that callback when he goes to the door and they hug, that was the longest, most beautiful hug in the movie for me. I thought that was just really lovely. And even if I still felt like I kind of could have used more about that storyline in a movie that was already 2 hours and 40 some odd minutes
Very
long.
much so. Because that really has to do with a little bit more difficult to talk about conflict.
Yes.
And I think for as powerful and as much rage as this movie has, I don't know, at risk of seeming insensitive, I felt like sometimes it shied away from the real difficult conflict and instead walked right up to pretty well-worn conflict and expressed rage about it.
That's fair.
The stuff that's already easy to get mad
exactly.
about.
Just, I guess you could say a trope. Yeah. So that was a disappointing thing for me in this movie.
I'm glad I'm not the only one to feel that way, Tommy. That's reinforcing. I think the the whole experience, like what this movie is a gift of for me, is the experience of seeing this movie through characters and I think their experience through time that I haven't seen before. This movie does some things uniquely and gives me a perspective that is new. Because generally, even if it's black and white soldiers in Vietnam, it's generally an angsty soldier story that might have some racial terms and angst in it, but it's more about the soldiers' experience than it is about the fact that these soldiers had a substantively different experience than white soldiers in Vietnam. And I'm thankful that this movie exists for that.
Right.
So, Pete, I think the reason you want more out of that story of Otis and Tien and the daughter is that, for me, that is the theme that underlies everything that plays out in this story, from Norman's message of we've got to love each other to ending with Martin Luther King and the entire Marvin Gaye being present everywhere. The constant message, even as Paul, he's singing that Marvin Gaye song right before he gets shot, is an enduring message of we've got to love each other. That's the only way we're going to get out of this nonsense. And so since that is what I saw continuously raising its head throughout this film, I was expecting, as you were, much more resolution with that, because that's where we get that. We get that family that's been separated and coming together and unifying and bridging love across decades. Reunification of that family, to me, I should have felt more with that, and that's why I wanted more. And because I was struggling with why we didn't go there. We need to see where the money goes and all that. That's the MacGuffin, but as we pointed out from the beginning, that's not what this is about. It's not about the gold. It's not about the money. So that's the one thing, because I thought if you end with Martin Luther King's speech and then point out the fact that 1 week later he was shot, I'm like, this is Spike's MLK movie. He did Malcolm X. Yeah. This is his MLK movie. And to not hit that a little harder, I felt, that's what I really needed for this film. And I could have, from the woman, I could have used a hint of not perfect woman, a hint of resentment, a hint of anger about how things turned out. Something. She's not a fully fleshed character. Right. She's just there to bring him in, serve him a great thing, forgive him for everything, and then make a platitude about race. So, I mean, I think the female characters in this movie left something to be desired.
There could have been more. From the,
yeah. Like I realize as you're talking about that, like the things that I'm calling out about the daughter are just what you can see. Right. Not at all what you learn from who she is as a character, because she doesn't get a chance to. No. So, that I totally agree with that.
Well, some quick history about this movie. The film this is directly from IMDb, and I had no idea about this before I did research. The film was originally titled The Last Tour. It was written by Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo. It was about 4 aging white vets who were heading back to Vietnam. Oliver Stone was attached to direct it at one point, but moved on.
Huh.
So then...
Let me guess, Clint Eastwood was going to be in it.
Really?
Are you serious?
No,
Oh, okay.
So the producer read in an interview that Spike Lee's favorite film is The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and thought that Lee would appreciate the similar elements in the last tour. Lee liked the premise, and he and his co-writer Kevin Wilmot rewrote the script to make it about black soldiers. I think that's fantastic. I think that's a great backstory. I had no idea that was out there, and I think that makes for an interesting take on this movie too.
It's also interesting that it's essentially Charade. With Cary Grant, which we just did on the show.
What do you mean?
It's coming out soon. Well, I mean, it's about the
war veterans.
Soldiers,
the soldiers.
war veterans treasure coming together, trying to get the money.
Yeah.
It's very different in execution, but a different part of their story. But it's just funny that all of a sudden, like, these are the stories that are out there. So.
Well, it's like we're defining trope, right?
Well, they've always called Charade the white Defy Bloods. Right?
Yeah.
Does that track?
That's right.
Well, you talk about the execution and how it's different. And I think a couple of you guys mentioned how you can feel Spike Lee's hand in this movie. What were some of the things that you really liked that made this a Spike Lee joint?
Well, we got the Spike dolly shot.
Twice.
The dolly tracking shot. Right. Yeah. So that's very exciting.
Cool.
I was just waiting for it now. It's effectively the Hitchcock cameo.
Yes.
And I think they did it well. It wasn't long enough, I think, in either shot.
Tom, you mentioned something about Double Impact.
Oh, his every time that they would hug in this movie, it would be played with coverage over one shoulder and then again over the other shoulder. And I think it might be, I know that he's used this in the past. There are certain things, never for a hug, but I had just watched as a part of the Black Lives Matter Inside Man on Netflix. I guess it's listed as the BLM thing.
I don't know why, but okay.
I think just because it's Spike Lee.
Yes.
But there's like a grift part where he like deposits the diamond and it's played twice. So that's different. But in this, I think it's perfectly timely in a time when for social distancing is I felt those hugs. I miss hugs more. I mean, I live alone and hugging a dog is a little weird. And so, but I mean, every time they would hug, it was a really cool cinematic way to solidify brothers coming together.
Yeah.
Because
I love that.
Hugs don't make noise. High fives make noise.
Right.
Hugs don't, but instead he did the visual job of making a hug make noise, which I thought was really cool.
Spike Lee's hugs do make noise, but I think it's interesting because I didn't notice them as double impacts when I was watching it.
Oh,
because I just thought they were really long. This is almost embarrassing to admit. I just thought they were really long, like double slap intense hugs, even though
like coming apart and then coming back together.
And then once you showed the video, once you brought up the video of what double impact was, I was like, oh. Yeah, so it's
coverage.
Thing. It's a filmmaking thing.
Do you know the first double impact? Do you have a sense of, just from film history, how long the double impact has been a tool?
I've usually noticed them, or when I first started noticing them, was explosions. That I felt that it was a way of that you spend so much money on explosions and have 4 or 5 cameras on them. At some point, directors said,
triple, quadruple.
Screw it. We're just going to show it blowing up 3 to 4 times. And that cinematic language was immediately forgiving because it's like one thing you kind of want to see again from another thing is an explosion. Pete, go ahead.
As soon as they started using them on people, I started getting really frustrated because it looks like they screw up, right? It looks like they just didn't tweak the edit.
The very first one, when they meet in the hotel in Defy Bloods, legitimately looks like bad editing.
It looks like bad editing.
But then it became
until
more
you realize
deliberate.
He's doing it
right.
Yeah, until he does it multiple times.
Yeah.
And I think it's just sloppy, and I hate. It's like
you don't like it.
It's like fashion choices that I think are weird. Like I don't know. It just, to me, it's like, how did we adapt to thinking this is useful and cool when it's stupid? It's just a stupid, sloppy editing choice, and I hate it.
Well, now
it makes me crazy.
The purpose of it is to highlight emotion.
I didn't like it at all.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I get that, but like this could go to like other conversations we've had about like like handheld camera, right? Where we talk about shaky cam and stuff like this, where it became a thing to do and something special because it was supposed to make things raw. And so the idea about the double impact is meant to highlight the event, give it more weight, give it more emotional presence. So I get why you might think it's stupid, but I also understand the purpose that he's trying to do by putting it in this movie, even though I didn't realize it was happening.
Well, exactly. And I think that is a challenge of using a tool like this, or I'll just say it, a trick. Because it is a manipulation that is risky because there is a non-zero portion of the population watching this movie who are going to think that it's sloppy editing.
Yeah. And my hands up in confession.
Who are not going to feel emotional about it. They're going to feel like, God, Spike Lee, I thought was a better filmmaker than that. How did he let that get through?
It's all about vocabulary, and people adapt. I mean, it goes back to just the initial concept of editing. If you see somebody raising a knife towards somebody, and then another shot of somebody could be 100 miles away reacting, defensively, our brain puts that together because we're, we have to assemble some type of meaning. I think it's just going to be a visual vocabulary that people are going to adapt and adjust to, because heck, you've got to remember decades ago when TV, news stations started having the crawl go across the bottom, and it was like, there's too much information on my screen. I don't know what to pay attention to. Now there's everything on there now, right? It's
we crawl in 6 directions.
Yes, Pete, just stop being a grumpy old man and get over it, okay?
Dang it, Steve! The double impact is like the cinema equivalent of Crocs.
They're making a comeback now. Crocs are making a comeback in quarantine. So
this is the problem.
I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that we're able to talk about all those things, because I think whether they're effective or not, I feel like they've had purpose, and I think it's interesting to think of it as a manipulation, because it ultimately is, right. And some manipulations we enjoy, and some we get a little bit pulled out with.
And speaking about manipulations, because you brought up the idea of Spike Lee things and stuff, I'd just wanted to throw on the pyre the aspect ratios. There's 3 different aspect ratios used in this movie
on my list,
and then also the subtitles.
Yeah.
Right. Weird thing about the subtitles. Every word is capitalized. Didn't know. I just don't understand it. That to me seems like a typographical error. That's my double impact to Pete. But yeah, if we want to talk about the aspect ratios for a second, that's a big swing.
Well, I got the old one. Did you feel like that was a manipulation too? Did you feel like that was it was a trick? Was it effective? Was it not?
I think everything, so many things in cinema are tricks in a way that I would rather call them illusions. Because changing cinema language is respectable.
On the prestige.
A trick makes it seem like, I felt that the score, personally, I loved the soundtrack in this movie. The score, I hated. Because that was the biggest trick in the movie. It was so
I love the score.
Overbearing and manipulative. That I call a trick. That I say, like, you're so worried that your film can't get you somewhere, you need the score to force people into a way to feel. Whereas the aspect ratio, I felt, was an interesting way to switch things up.
Yeah.
Well, the aspect ratio was a narrative tool.
Mm-hmm.
We needed something, and I think we especially needed something because of their
no de-aging
of their strategy of not de-aging or having different actors play the younger characters. We had to do something, and it was an easy and elegant way to do it. There is actually the most interesting one, I think it was, which for me was pretty shocking and very fast, was as we were moving back from, I think it was the first flashback where we were in the valley with the plane, and then there is the aspect ratio starts to change, and it's very slow as the frame just sort of grows. And there's a motorcycle wipe.
Yeah.
And the motorcycle swings by, and suddenly you're in a McDonald's.
Right.
And I thought that exemplifies why that aspect ratio is so important.
Right.
We needed it. Like, I feel like the score, like it or hate it, like, I didn't feel manipulated by it. I thought it was a luscious pairing to where we were in the world.
Even in the battle scenes? Like, when we had the battle scenes,
I thought that he just set it
weird.
He set Spotify to vaguely like courageous, because it didn't even match. It didn't match the visuals.
Guys.
It didn't match the visuals. It was so weird.
Like, hey Google, get me courageous strings. Like, it was it was so weird.
Google, don't do that.
Oh, sorry. I thought if I didn't use the other one's name that it would work fine. No, I was really taken out of it during the battle scenes. It really felt like a strange imitation of what I would be looking to see. And now I agree with you, Tommy, that the soundtrack was amazing, especially the acapella "What's Going On" as they're in, honestly, they could have just pulled the soundtrack, the voice out of the soundtrack and used that for a lot of these scenes. But I just in the battle scenes, a lot of times I almost wanted to turn the sound off because I was so distracted.
Especially by that first one.
Score.
The very first one was just, it might as well have been a different movie.
What did you love about it, Pete? What was the thing that you liked?
I just thought it was luscious, and it was very much not Spike. You know what I mean?
That's fair.
It was new. It was something. It was letting.
It wasn't just a saxophone.
Terrence. I think Terrence Blanchard. I just think they let him loose a little bit on this score in a way that I think really. It provided a wonderful sort of sound foundation to a lot of these more intense sequences. I loved the soundtrack. I also loved the score for the very reason. I think they use music generally well.
I'm glad that we disagree on it because for me, it was so distracting, and that was one of the things that it made it hard for me to buy into the scenes that where action was happening.
Well, I think it's interesting too that the sound, the score is largely listenable, which is another, I think, a trait of Spike's scores. His music is usually, it's good music, but this score, it's not. This one, I think, has a lot of really lovely themes that I think will work well and get better over time.
Yeah, Pete will be very courageous as he goes out to get the mail. He'll have that courageous, triumphant music as he goes out to get his mail.
Mostly what I listen to is Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross soundtracks. So all of this is academic. I'm all Social Network, y'all.
Yeah, so you're just always sort of in a rubber suit. There's just always something a little spider girl about you.
Well, let's talk about the cast a little bit. I mean, we've already talked a lot about Delroy Lindo, and some of the other ones that were here. Are there people that you would like to bring up specifically? I think potentially part of my difficulty with the pinballing was that in Delroy, in the Paul character, is that I didn't really understand how he was affecting the other characters. One of that big things really happened with Jonathan Majors, who played his son David, is that I couldn't understand David's motivation as it changed throughout the film because of the intense changes that were happening to Paul. And that was really difficult for me. I don't know, again, if that was his performance, but I feel like the way that character was written, it was really difficult for me to get a sense of what was going on.
That's interesting because Marvin Gaye was asking that the entire movie.
Jonathan Majors' character as David was always a little difficult for me, starting from the way that he was introduced.
Yeah.
In this really weird, he's just there in the room. He just showed up. It seemed very sort of haphazard and stuff. And he's Spike Lee puts a lot on his shoulders. As I mentioned before, he's supposed to be sort of really broad comic relief. He's shown as he's filmed as a small child, as an adult man sipping orange juice with this weird sort of, he's in a room of men and he's really filmed from the top down below. And then he's supposed to have a love relationship and he's supposed to be the better of them. And he's supposed to be, he was a lot. He was if there was one pinballing thing for me, it was everything they tried to make him do.
Right.
The actor. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I felt that way about that too. And I think it had an effect on that entire main storyline for me. And that's kind of why I felt that way. You mentioned the love interest. That's Melanie Thierry, who played Hetty. That was equally as extreme for me because she went back and forth and did all kinds of crazy things too. With the orbital characters, right? With not the main four guys, it was very difficult for me to understand character motivation and what they were going to choose to do next because it felt like they kept changing on me.
I think one of the problems potentially is, to use your word, the orbital characters were used as pure reaction.
Right.
To the main four. And so they didn't really feel like real people to me. He did a big push about daddy issues with the character of David, but that did come later. He didn't seem like a daddy's boy in the beginning. He seemed like an opportunistic dolt.
Right.
And so, I mean, they just needed when I talked in the very beginning about some of this movie, one of my complaints is that it feels a little episodic. At times, they hike for a while, stop, and then one of the orbital characters gets them all into a fight.
Right.
And then there's a joke, and then they make up, and then they hike, and then a joke and a fight, and then make up. And a lot of that, I think the orbital characters bear the brunt of a lot of that. She's supposed to be a love interest. She's not. She's the voice of righteousness. She's not. It's a little, it's a lot.
Are you suggesting that some of that character trait is called into question when she becomes complicit in the
wanting a share,
thieving of the gold?
No, I guess I was saying I didn't finish it. I could have said voice of righteousness versus cute love interest.
Okay.
I guess it wasn't voice of righteousness versus element of greed. It was just her. She swung in the weeds.
They do have a meet
She swung in the wind. They do have a literal meet cute in the weeds. Yeah,
they do. It's adorable.
A meet cute in Vietnam is not. Yeah, it's not in the wind. It's in the weeds.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I felt that way. I mean, I don't know if it's fair to call them orbital characters, but that's really the way that the story is told. And I think for me, I would have enjoyed, just like Pete is saying, more of the Otis, Tien, and daughter story, more of the stories with direct relation with what was going on with those sort of main four characters. Because I think there was a lot to tell there, and I think we spent too much time with those reactions that you're talking about, Tommy. And because of that, I felt less good about the way that those actors came out, because they felt so like paper thin. I love Chadwick Boseman. I thought he was amazing in this movie. I'm really happy he was in it. I feel like, for me, I know it's the Delroy Lindo movie, but I feel like Chadwick Boseman like carried the movie for me. Like, I was happy every time we were watching him on scene, and I think that's kind of on purpose, right? I mean, that's who Norman is to these guys. He's their motivation, and I just felt like it was wonderfully delivered by Spike Lee and by Chadwick Boseman. They did it, and it was perfect for me.
I do too. I like Chadwick Boseman a lot, and it's surprising because he's not in the movie very much.
No.
Like he's got kind of a small but powerful role, and I found myself like wondering actively as I'm getting choked up at their hug at the end, how did this get so earned?
Right.
Like, how did they make me feel like this? Because I just got through a very weird like staring contest with Delroy Lindo in a river, and now I'm like on the verge of tears. And I don't know how that happened. Like, that was amazing.
It's earned off screen. And that's kind of the amazing thing, right? Because they're constantly talking about Paul being their motivation, giving him that Christ-like sort of like that reverence and all these things. They're constantly talking about,
Norman.
I said Paul. Norman. Yeah. Norman being their sort of goal, and that they're there for him and all these things. I think the script actually does a really good job of setting you up for that emotional payoff.
Oh yeah, he's the best of them, and I think they say that a couple times. And you've got early on, you've got that whole, he's teaching them as they're out there. He's, as you said, he's sort of that Christ figure. He's got these ideas. He teaches them about MLK and Malcolm X and all of these things, and so he represents the ideal. So I think it's you don't need a lot of screen time to get you don't need a lot of screen time to get the payoff from that, because I think it, as JJ says, a lot of it is off screen, because it's the interactions between them. You notice the void of the, with the only four being there, and the absence, I think, speaks strongly with Norman. Yeah.
Well, and part of it also is he's all promise. He can be the best of them because he didn't come home.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Which is a dark thing to say, but it is true. He's the absolute, he's the savior, he's the promise, he's what could have been.
Yeah, those aspects of the story, those inferences are kind of what are the best parts of this movie to me. And where you can take the story in your mind with the metaphor and what they're telling you. I think that what makes this movie a discussion piece is, I think, what makes it good.
I know we're getting a little bit long in the tooth on this, but I'm very curious how you guys feel about the well, I'll call it the last Spike Lee-ism that I'm interested in, is the documentarian strokes at the beginning and the end, bringing in the real footage, doing things like when they mention a person, whether it's Aretha Franklin or this Oliver character, showing their pictures on screen.
Atticus.
Atticus, right.
Atticus stuff.
Those kinds of things. this movie, Spike uses that more than I think any other film that I've seen him use this particular trick. It was a lot, and I'm curious how it hit you guys.
Well, it was too much for me, and I mentioned it a little bit in my intro.
Yeah.
That alongside the Netflix release made it feel like I was watching, and this is where we get in the concept of this felt like new original content from Netflix as opposed to a theatrical release for Spike Lee. And again, I think it's because of those factors put together that it made me feel that way. It was more than I've seen him do in other movies, and it felt like it was chosen to do for that reason. So I didn't like it. And my question for myself in that is, how would I have felt how would it have hit me if I was in the theater watching it? And I don't really know. I can't figure out how it would feel, but so I didn't like it. And I usually love that kind of stuff that take you out of the movie in a way that's creative and wonderful. But for this, with it being released on TV, it was too much for me.
Well, part of the Netflix deal was it was supposed to be released in theaters.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I was reading an article about Spike, his journey to getting this made, and he said, yeah, the part of the distribution deal was it was supposed to be released in theaters. Netflix wanted it in theaters. COVID happened. So then, the reporter asked, well, do you see this, getting out into theaters? And Spike said, yes, I would like to see it out in theaters when it's safe for people to be out in theaters to see it. So sure. The question is, now that it's been out there on Netflix, is anybody going to go out there? Does this merit the big cinematic experience? I don't know. I think parts of it do, but I reacted really well to this. I thought all that stuff worked for me because I'm always open to breaking format and doing something different. Sometimes it draws attention to itself, but I think that's the intent of, I'm going to do something and we're going to set this up at the beginning of, here's all these historical events, so that when I talk about this soldier that, threw himself on a grenade, and we have a photo of that, and then we talk about Aretha Franklin and we have a photo of her. It wasn't too much because it was at the beginning, the end, and just a few moments in between. And for me, I think it keeps us rooted in the fact that there's historical importance to this. And again, this is where with the orbital characters, I don't care, because to me, it's not about the characters. It's about Spike sharing a message that he wants the audience to walk away with. And so for me, that format works because it's not about a story to be told. It's about a story that's conveying information, and it's the information that's of primary importance, not the journey of the characters alone.
Well, and now, Steve, you may know this answer because of what we do for Trailer Rewind, but it is already showing up as number 3 for Netflix on their top 10 list for the weekend. Do you know what that means? Does that mean
I have no idea where they get those numbers, because I saw they started doing that with this week number 1 is this, and I'm
they have to take it on their word because they don't
on their
numbers.
word. Right? Yes, they don't release numbers, and it's. We want, because I saw like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs was up in the top 10. I don't know if it's
right now.
Yes, because it just hit Netflix. So I don't know if it's regional.
Because of Pride Week.
What? That doesn't make any sense.
No, but I don't know if it's regional, because it could be a regional factor, because what shows up in my top 10 may be different from what Tommy sees and what you see up there.
That never occurred to me.
Because I've got to imagine it's not going to be the same globally.
Your VPN to Tokyo.
Right, yes.
You want to see some interesting stuff?
Yes, I imagine. So
all that is interesting. But the information point, the data point that I found that in was on the internet. It wasn't on my screen as number 3. It was saying it's number 3 for the weekend. I know that top 10 sort of ribbon that you have as part of Netflix may change for different people, but I'd be really interesting to see it. And I mean, Pete, that we know right through ComScore that we can get that data. It's just that people don't release it, right?
Right.
Okay.
That is exactly right.
Yeah. And
Netflix has extraordinary data, accurate data.
Yeah. They just don't share
habits.
Yeah.
So I'd be wondering what informs that. I thought that was a really interesting thing there. And kind of, moving forward, I think, we have to figure out how we're going to view movies like this. I'm really thankful you mentioned that part of the deal was to get it into theaters. I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine that that's still going to happen now that we're in this quicksand of what's going to happen. Yeah. But maybe this is a good measure of how a movie's performing if Netflix is promoting it in this way.
Well, I like the. I just want to get back to the documentary stuff because
Yeah.
I think it's really important, and because I have a nit and I feel like a very small, petty person because of it. He used, it's going to tell you a lot about me, an offensively banal font typeface for the titles on screen. I was agitated every single time.
Kind of looked like a child did it.
Yeah, it was like a
iMovie.
disrespectful iMovie PowerPoint template font, and I was mad.
So between you and Tommy, we're now grammar and and usage trolls.
Yes, yeah, and I think you'll find that I would not like my rating of the film, and my overall enjoyment of the film is not necessarily impacted by typeface.
No, I get it.
But I was agitated.
And Tommy, about the capitalization, like it's not
right.
It's weird though. It's weird. What's the point?
Right. Who line edited that stuff?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
I think those are fine nits, but what I'm mostly happy about is the fact that you guys confessed them, because I think that says much more about you than it does about the movie.
It's a safe space.
Exactly. So, but other than that, did you guys have any other closing remarks that you wanted to say about Da 5 Bloods?
I tried to go on a little bit of a dive. He makes such a big deal during his soliloquy. You're not going to kill Paul. You're not going to kill Paul.
Yeah.
So I went back into biblical references just to see if there was anything. There wasn't anything that much other than the fact that Delroy Lindo does turn a corner. He is visited by someone and turns in Paul in the Bible was a persecutor of Christians until on the road to Damascus, he's visited by God, is shown a vision of Jesus, and then becomes an apostle. That was the only thing that I could really come with as far as Paul, what the importance of Paul, because I like Bible stuff. Steve, thoughts?
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing. And you name a character Paul, and I don't think there's much there.
Well, what I said was kind of smart.
No, exactly. I mean, he does sort of have his conversion moment where he has his vision, and that was sort of because he's right there in that moment with Norman, and then when he comes out of that, he's surrounded.
Right.
Well, I think to really figure out what the movie's trying to say, I need both of you guys to do research on the Apostle Melvin. Right now, I think it's time that we get into it and rank it.
Let's rank this movie here today. Yeah. Flick chart.
That's the most appropriate song that you've ever written for a movie. We've got all the movies we've talked about on this show ranked over at flickchart.com/TNR Film Board. Flickchart is a really cool site where you can create a tournament-style stack ranking of your movie preferences. So check it out and find out how your film favorites fare against ours. Pete, what's going on with Flickchart?
Well, I just have to say, I just ranked on my personal list, and I came up with the most troublesome pairing that I think I've ever run up against.
Oh, boy.
It is, how do you rate Da 5 Bloods against 30 Nights? How do you even start?
Oh, no. 30 Nights.
No, that's not actually our first ranking. I just felt like you all had to share in my anxiety. It was very difficult.
That's appropriate.
Let's see.
If it's about the Vietnam experience versus the Vietnam experience. Clearly 30 Nights really gets in there.
Da 5 Bloods against Kingsman: The Golden Circle.
Is that the second one? I know I asked this every time. Kingsman: The Golden Circle?
I think I am too. I'm Kingsman.
Da 5 Bloods.
Da 5 Bloods.
Okay.
I can't believe it.
You
guys.
You and Tommy do your Rochambeau action.
Okay, Tom. 1, 2, 3.
Paper. Oh.
Scissors.
A shotgun. What?
You got to keep.
Oh, it just goes right away. Okay, go.
You just keep going until you come up with something different.
Go ahead.
All right. 1, 2, 3. Rock. Paper.
Scissors. Oh.
You beat me.
So Kingsman wins.
Why did you say, oh, you
because
beat
I feel
me?
bad.
It's paper, rock, scissors, remorse.
Okay, so that means Kingsman wins. That's deeply unfortunate.
That's why I said, oh. I feel like I'm making a bad decision for America.
No, that was wrong. Okay. How about Da 5 Bloods or The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey?
Da 5 Bloods.
Da 5 Bloods.
See, everybody listen to me. I said Da 5 Bloods.
Yeah.
My name's Tommy.
How about Da 5 Bloods against The Dark Knight Rises?
Dark Knight Rises.
Is that the third one?
That's the third one.
Dark Knight Rises.
Remember, I'll say Da 5 Bloods.
I am saying Da 5 Bloods.
I'm saying Da 5 Bloods. How about Da 5 Bloods or The Bourne Legacy?
That's the Jeremy Renner one, correct?
Oh, Da 5 Bloods.
Da 5 Bloods.
Da 5 Bloods.
Da 5 Bloods or Yesterday?
Ooh.
Abstain?
Da 5 Bloods.
Ooh. Yeah, Da 5.
Da 5 Bloods. Da 5 Bloods or Hail Caesar?
Da 5 Bloods.
Oh,
I love it.
It's been a long time since I've seen it. And usually Coen movies, you need
I'm
like
going to say Hail Caesar.
4 viewings to really get it. I'm going to say Da 5 Bloods.
JJ, you were Da 5 Bloods?
I was.
I am also Da 5 Bloods. Congratulations.
Oh.
Da 5 Bloods is now number 48 on your flick chart.
Out of?
Oh, you should know that. How about 93? 48 out of 93. That puts it squarely at right around 48%. It is, if we are to go by the algorithm, it should be a 2.5-star movie over.
And that's interesting because
so I'm curious.
When I did my own flick chart, it came up a little bit lower. It was a 2-star for me. But even in our conversation here, I'm definitely appreciating much more about what the story is telling. We didn't talk about this that much on the show, but I felt when I was watching it, I felt like the story was really straightforward and I wasn't able to buy into the subtext. You guys have really helped me learn a bit about different ways to see what was happening there. So I raised it a 0.5 star. I went right in line with the algorithm. I am 2.5 stars and a like.
Tommy, where are you?
3 and a like.
Steve,
4 and a like.
Okay, yeah, it came out much higher than you guys on my list. It landed 264 out of 1453. That's an 82%, and that's a solid 4 stars. And I'm going to stick with it. It's a 4 stars and the like for me too. So I really enjoyed my time with this movie. I think it's Spike Lee at some of his expressive bests. And even when it doesn't really work for me, I so love that this guy exists. I just love it.
Agreed.
Yeah. Where do we go from here? Next month, we kind of have a hybrid month because of the weird holding pattern for the industry. We are definitely going to talk about the Hamilton movie release on Disney Plus July 3rd. We'll talk about it after the holiday week at some point. But additionally, the new Christopher Nolan movie, Tenet, is still talking about a something in July release date. And we're kind of geeked about that too. So that may be a possibility as well. So stay tuned.
You can use my joke, JJ. You can use my joke.
The tentative release.
Yeah. It's all in the delivery, baby. You just gotta love it.
I think at this point, that's America's joke.
You prefaced it by saying it was your joke, so I felt comfortable saying it. I wouldn't have had you not. Where is the main show right now? You guys are doing Alfred Hitchcock, right?
I don't know.
No, Cary Grant.
Not doing Alfred Hitchcock. We're in the middle of Cary Grant, and so there. So we've
the Alfred Hitchcock of actors.
It's the this. So we just finished as last week, Arsenic and Old Lace, and this coming week we've got North by Northwest.
Oh, that's Alfred Hitchcock, right? Am I just out of my gourd on this?
No, you're right.
Okay,
you're fine. You're good. Yeah, no, you're in good shape.
Thank you.
And then the Alfred Hitchcockiest Alfred Hitchcock that Alfred Hitchcock never made was Charade, and that's coming up as the last movie of our.
Oh, you're doing that
of our movie. We're doing Charade, and so that's coming out at the end of June. And that'll be before we take a little July hiatus.
And that's awesome because you can talk about it in relation to this story now, too. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
We did talk about Discard in the opening, so you can come find us there. But I also need to tell you about that the absolute best way to support what we do here is on Patreon. Committing to connecting there helps us do fun things and support all of our growth endeavors for a film-filled future. You can find our Patreon info at patreon.com/thenextreel. We appreciate you Patreon folks so much. There are special channels on the Discord server for patrons alongside our general chats too. That's where we'll keep the conversation going, but for this one, say goodnight, Pete Wright.
Good night.
See you later, Tommy Handsome.
We did it!
And one more word from Steve Sarmento.
Hondo.
At the next reel, when the movie ends, our conversation begins. Till next.